for AWS DevOps training series. Today we are going to do a deep dive on AWS EC2. We are going to understand what are the different attributes or features that this EC2 is having. We divide this session into two parts. So first part we are going to understand multiple instance features what we are having on EC2, and then we are going to understand some kind of what is Amazon Mesh Image, what is a EBS volume, what are the security groups, especially why do we need this security group, what is an inbound rule and what is an outbound rule. So all these types of stuff we are going to understand, and at the end of this EC2 deep dive session 2 we are going to implement a simple architecture on this using autoscaling groups and load balancers. Okay, so the concepts on EC2 are more important. Like for example, basically whenever you get into across any interview on EC2 or AWS DevOps engineer setups, the first question you get is what is a security group, or what's the difference between a security group and network access control list. So this NACLs will discuss in detail when we go for the VPC session, but security groups are more important whenever you come for an EC2 instance. Okay, so security groups are nothing but the gatekeepers for EC2 instance. If a connection wants to enter into EC2, then you need a secure passage into that. So that's why these security groups acts as a firewall or acts as a gatekeeper who searches for that particular connection and only allows those connections into that. Okay, so for example, you are having your home and you want to enter only via your main door. So think that as a port. On a server, a particular port only you want to enable the communication. So that's how the security group works, and we will also discuss some topic on elastic IP and public IP. We will see what is an EC2 autoscaling group and how does that work, and what is a load balancing. We will also have demonstrating on EC2 scaling groups in the next session. And also we'll see load balancers, what are the different types of load balancers out in the market on AWS, and what are its different usages we have. Okay, so coming back to the important features as we see on EC2, I'll just give a quick recap. So the Elastic Cloud Compute offering of AWS provides you the instances or nothing but the virtual machines, and images. Images are nothing but the image. Whenever I say image, it's a backup, or it's a what do you say? It's a machine image of your instance. Let us say it's a picture of the instance at a given point of time. Let us say if you have taken an image of an instance today, all the content that is present on that server will be stored as an image, so that whenever you're launching a next instance, you can take this image, and whatever the changes you made on the instances will be directly populated into the new instance which you take from this image. We'll see this in action, but think that image is nothing but it's a replica or it's a picture of an instance at a given point of time. Elastic block storage is nothing but a volume you attach to the instance. It's nothing but a hard disk. As we discussed, elastic block storage volumes, GP2 volumes, or different volumes we are having. So this will be attached to the instance so that this will be serving as a volume. And in the network and security, we majorly discuss on the security groups and some other key concepts on this. And load balancers and autoscaling groups are very important on EC2. In load balancing, it generally, what do you say, it divides or it merges the traffic at an instance based on the load. So load balancing itself says that based on the load, it will balance the traffic across the multiple instances behind it. Okay, and autoscaling groups are nothing but speaks about the highly available and scalability of EC2 instance, the feature of that EC2 instance. Let us say for example your EC2 instance dies because or terminates because of some manual error or because of some hardware failure. The EC2 instance have a capability of scaling it again and healing itself and creating a new one by using a feature called autoscaling groups. So this autoscaling groups are nothing but the ability of EC2 instance to regrow, I mean to say not regrow but reinitiate an instance if a failure is happened. So that's why we generally always come across a term called fault tolerance or high availability says same. Highly available is nothing but at any given point of time, you will ensure that your business is available at any given point of time. You don't have any failure in your application. So that's how this major features comes into picture in EC2, and which always addresses to that two topics of highly available and fault tolerance. Okay, and if you get into the key attributes again, as we seen, this network security. Under network security we have multiple things like security groups, elastic IP addresses, placement groups, key pairs and network interfaces. The security groups, as we discussed, it gives you the additional security and instance based on which you allow the traffic to the internet. So elastic IPs, so there is a difference between the elastic IP and public IP associated with an instance. So this elastic IPs lies within AWS account, and public IP addresses will get attached to the instance once it is launched. Okay, so think of a scenario like you are having an EC2 instance where your application is loaded, and tomorrow that instance got terminated. If you launch a new instance, your public IP address will be changed. So this is major questions that you generally get whenever you launch a new instance. Your IP addresses get changed. Okay, even if you start and stop your instance, your public IP address will get changed. Okay, so in the similar fashions, whenever you terminate the instance and launch a new instance, your IP address will get changed. So if, for example, if there is X application which is accessing your server, and your server dies and your IP address changes, so that application which was communicating to the earlier IP address will get failed. So to eradicate such kind of issues, EC2 has introduced a feature of elastic IPs. We'll see in action on the console. This elastic IPs gives you a public IP addresses which is static and can be associated to any instance at a given point of time. So if suppose tomorrow your instance dies, if a new instance gets created, so then you attach this elastic IP again to that new instance, and that X application again works perfectly. Okay, and one more important question when you get into the AWS solution architect or cloud practitioner or any level of certifications, you get majorly questions on the elastic IPs and placement groups. So placement groups are nothing but whenever you want to launch an application where your servers should have high bandwidth of connection with very low latency. Okay, at this point of time you place your servers side by side, physically side by side. Okay, so actually when you launch two instances, server 1 and server 2, physically they will not be present at side by side. Server 1 will be at a different location and server 2 will be at a different physical location, so that whenever server 1 communicates with server 2, there can be a very microseconds or milliseconds of latency for passing the information between them. Okay, to eradicate such kind of scenarios, EC2 has come up with a concept of placement groups, where if you place the servers side by side, a very side by side, then the latency will be very less. Immediately it can communicate. Okay, so for example, if you are doing any huge data analysis kind of thing, so then you want to launch the servers in that particular clusters or spreads or something like that. So in that case you utilize this option of placement groups. And key pairs we have already seen. This will be a public key pair combinations that will be used to connect to your EC2 instance from your local. Again, so this network interfaces we'll see on the console. This network interfaces are nothing but it will be utilized to connect your EC2 instance to an internet. Okay, think of a scenario where you are having your laptop but you are not able to communicate to the internet. So then what you did, the conventional desktop computers, you connected to a router, and router connected to an internet service provider. Okay, so that is the interface, the network interface, making your computer speak to the internet and make it communicate to the external systems. In the similar fashion, network interfaces will be attached to the instances like EC2. and make it available to the internet, so you will be able to connect, or any other applications or systems will be able to connect. So this network interfaces will act as a piece of communication, it acts as a routing from your hardware where your data lies to external systems like you or any other X applications. So this comes into a network and security. I'll log into the console after this couple of understandings on load balancing and auto scaling groups. Now I'll be logging into the console and we'll be discussing this load balancing and auto scaling groups in detail after we see all these topics on the console. I'll be explaining this with an example. A load balancing, what is a load balancing, how many load balancer types are there, actually why load balancing very important, and what is an auto scaling group, and what are the different types in what are the different things that we need for an auto scaling group. Okay, so let me get into the console. Okay, so I'm going to the AWS management console. I've already signed in the console quite a couple of hours back, so I directly logged in. So this is how you see the console. As we discussed, these are the region. So I'll be selecting the North Virginia region and getting into the EC2 dashboard, or nothing but the EC2 instance. So once you log in into here, you will see n number of options on this EC2 console pane, where you will see the resources page. You can see how many instances are running, what is an elastic, how many elastic IPs are there, auto scaling groups, instances, dedicated hosts, keepers, a lot of information on this. You can just hit this page and you can see what are the different options available on this. But now we are much interested in seeing what are the different options that we get when we launch an instance. Previously, we just launched an instance by taking the default options because we want to learn some Linux basics, because that will be utilized, that will be used for our DevOps trainings. So now we will see detailed options what we get whenever we launch an instance. Okay, so then we will see what is an AMI, how we can create an AMI, what is a volume, how we can create a snapshot, and we'll see what is a security group. We'll see what is a placement elastic IPs. I'll show the placement group. I'll not create this placement group because these are charged, so we'll just see how it is. And we have already seen key pairs. I'll also see the network interfaces. So after checking all this stuff, we will understand some basic theory or some kind of implementation behind this load balancing auto scaling, and then we will jump into the actual architecture of a sample architecture which I'll be explaining. Okay, so now let's click on instance. If you see, there are multiple options like on instances. If you click on instances, you will see what are the instances that are currently running. If you click on this search bar, you will see different filters available based on which you can filter your instances. If you want to see what are the running instances, you can type like this, filters like instance state is equal to running. I don't see any instances because I don't have any instances running currently. If you see the instance types, as we discussed in our earlier class, it will give you the list of the instance types that are available on AWS from which you can launch your instances. So previously we have seen instances like T1 micro, T2 micro, the C type, T type. So these are the different types of instances that are present. Either you can select like this and go ahead and try to launch an instance, but this is not an ideal way for launching an instance. We should launch it from here. Click on this and click on launch instance. Okay, so we'll understand all these topics and then we'll get into here, because all these options which we are seeing over here will be visible on this launch instance. Now let's get into this instance types, launch templates. So launch template is nothing but you will be creating a template based on which an EC2 instance will be created. Template is nothing but you will be setting some things, like for example, let us say I'm creating a launch template. So whenever I take a launch template, I can just create template 1, my first template. So this will keep some configurations constant, or like for example, all your application deals with a web server. So I want to set like I will be creating a template. Based on that template, users or some other development team can launch their servers. So in your template, you will set like, I want to use whatever the application operating systems you want to use. Okay, so let me do a quick start on this, where I can see or can just click on recently launched Amazon Linux. I want to select an Amazon Linux operating system. So you will be including this options in your template, so that this will be selected whenever you're launching this template or whenever you're launching a server using this template. Okay, so let me select an Amazon Linux. Then you can select instance type. Either you can select I don't want to include this in the instance type, or I can select some things on the drop down. Okay, so I've already selected this Amazon Linux, and I'll be selecting this from the drop down like T2 micro. Okay, and I'll be selecting one from my key pair. Let us say my first key pair. So these are the key pairs which we have already created. You can select either create a new key pair or select one key pair. And in the subnet, either you can select a subnet, or you can specify you need to select when you are launching an instance. Okay, so these are all the multiple options that you can provide. So you can just ignore this network interface stuff for now, because this will discuss much more when we are dealing with VPC. You can also set up what is the volumes that you can attach to this template, so that based on this template, an instance will be launched directly. So by default, I'm giving a 8 GB thing, and resource tags, and also you can give some advanced details like purchasing options, and we will see all these details on the instance pane. We get all these advanced details. I'll explain all that particular stuff when we are hitting the create instance stuff. Okay, and you will also have an option of user data. So this user data is very important whenever you come across your interviews, or whenever you come across your uh, what do you say, any kind of certification exams. So user data is nothing but it will be it will be executed on your server after it getting launched. Let us say you want to install an application, a web server. So let me say you want to install a HTTP Apache web server on your instance. So every time after you launch an instance, you will install it. Rather, if you want to do it every time after the instance is launched, you can include this on the user data. So user data is nothing but those are the set of commands or the scripts that will be executed on the server after launching or after creation. So that's why you have this user data to mention to AWS, hey AWS, after you launch the instance, could you please run this script so that my server will be ready to serve the application. So this is how user data can be created, or user data can be added to your instance. So let me create launch template. Okay, so this is how a launch template can be created. So from this launch template, you can see this option. From this launch template, I can directly launch an instance from the template. Okay, so this will get my values preloaded. Rather than selecting right from the scratch, it will get preloaded. The instance type, the operating systems, key pairs, and all the informations that will be loaded from the application. If you see the template, it is loaded with the default one. And if you see the Amazon machine image has been loaded, and the instance type has been loaded, key pair has been loaded, subnet has been loaded, and the volume, everything has been loaded. So this gives you the feasibility for the users. If you are working as a DevOps engineer and there are users on your application who want to launch instances for their particular use, so then you will provide a template to them rather than they selecting the options, because based on your organization or based on your following SDLC process, you might be having the options needs to be selected very carefully. If something goes wrong, it will be an issue at their end. So what you do is you provide a template to them. Hey guys, like whenever you want to launch an instance, please take this template and just click launch instance, so that it will launch the instance. So let me launch an instance from here. Let me open this in a new tab. So it shows if there are any instances state equal to running, it will come into this. Let me click into of this. Let me close this and give a refresh option. It will say there is one instance running which has launched just now and status is initializing. Okay, so this is how you can launch an instance from a launch template, and this launch templates will also be utilized whenever we discuss auto scaling groups. Okay, so make an understanding, launch templates are nothing but a predefined values for an instance to say Amazon that whenever an instance is launched, this is how you need to create. Okay, so getting into, let me terminate this instance for now because I've just created for explaining the launch template so that I don't have any extra billings. Okay, so one more important stuff is spot request. As we seen earlier, spot requests are nothing but the instances where you create for the request spot instances. So all these are charged: spot requests, reserved instances, dedicated hosts, and capacity reservations. These things does not come under your free tier. So I'm just giving an overview on this. I'm not creating anything because it will be charged for you. So just make an understanding. So you won't get much use cases in your day-to-day activities also for creating a spot request, dedicated host, or capacity reservation until or unless you are working more on a dedicated systems where a high latency, sorry, where you want a low latency implementations and all. Until or unless you will not much touch on this particular stuffs. But to make your understanding, so if you request for a spot instance, it will ask for particular details: what are the launch parameters, what machine image, and based on your bidding, based on your what do you say, the allocation strategy, price, and everything, your instance will be charged like this: estimated hourly play charge. So based on this, your spot instances will be created. You can go back to my earlier video where you can see what is a spot instance. And there is also one latest thing called as a savings plans launched by EC2, which will provide you a flexible benefits, discounts and all whenever you go to the Amazon customer care and just ask like, hey guys, this is how much of amount hardware we want to use, and we want to if we want to use this, so based on our usage, could you please give us any discounts. And also reserved instances, we can also we have also discussed this reserved instances. To purchase this reserved instances, so that if you reserve an instance for certain amount of time, your billing will be less. And dedicated hosts also we have seen. This is how you can allocate a dedicated host. You can just click on this and provide the few details on this, so that a host will be allocated, so that whenever you launch an instance, you can select this dedicated host. And capacity reservations also in the similar fashion, you can reserve an amount of capacity. Like for my account, I'll be using 100 gigs of RAM and 100 gigs of CPU or something like that. So a capacity will be reserved to you, so that whenever you launch an instance using that capacity reservation, so your costs will be reduced. So all this, starting from spot request, savings plans, reservation instance, dedicated host, all these set of items are more towards reducing your cost or optimizing the cost of your infrastructure based on your pre-planned usage of your hardware instances. Okay, so let me get into an instance and quickly launch the instance and see some more attributes what we get on this. So let me click on launch instance. So just a second, just click on launch instance. You should be landing at a page where it gives you an option for selecting everything. If you see, Amazon EC2 allows you to create, and you can just give, like for example, let us launch a simple web server, or let us launch a Linux instance and just see how you can access that server or that web server, making it as a web server. Okay, my web server. Then I'm selecting Amazon Linux image. You can select this architecture by default. I'm selecting the instance type, which is free tier eligible. I'll be selecting a key pair, which I'm having already my first key pair. And network settings, I'll be selecting the default VPC, and I don't have any preference on subnet. I'll be creating a new security group and allowing the SSH traffic. We'll come to the security group now. We'll discuss like what is a security group and how it is utilized for enabling the connections to the EC2 instance. Okay, and now if you click on this allow HTTPS traffic and allow HTTP traffic from internet, this will enable that port communication. But I don't want you to do this right now, because I want you to show some stuff before we get into this. So configuration, I'm just taking 8 gigs of volume. If you click on this advanced details, you will see all these options which we have discussed. A spot request, if you want to request for a spot instance, you can. Then you will see a domain join directory. So this is majorly important whenever you're working on an organization. So every organization will be having a domain. Like for example, if you're working for Google, you will be having a google.com. If you're working for a company, you will be having its own domain, where you will be having your email addresses, you'll be having your user details and all. So if you want to make this instance join to that domain, you can select it. So this will launch again into a new um, uh, Microsoft Azure. I mean, like Microsoft directories we have, Azure directories we have, some directory services we have. So you can set up that directories and all using this AWS. But again, this AD system, Active Directory system, is a complete different concept. So I don't want to jump into detail over here. So you can, if your organization is having any domain join directory which is majorly managed by a network team, you can select that. You can select an IAM instance profile. So coming to this instance profile, either if you don't understand any kind of options available on EC2, you can just click on this info. You can see the detailed information about this. So this instance profile says that if you want to access any other AWS services present on EC2, present on AWS from EC2, you need to have an IAM role, or you need to have some kind of access. So this kind of accesses are provided on AWS using an IAM role. Okay, so using an IAM role. So IAM role is nothing but identity access management role, which will be associated to an AWS service. Okay, it's nothing but a key for AWS service to access other AWS services. Like let us say for example, AWS EC2 wants to access files which are present on S3 bucket. So S3 bucket, we will see in detail what is an S3 and anything. So let us think that AWS EC2 server wants to access some files present in a different AWS service. So at that particular time, there should be a role or permission attached to this EC2, from which this can be added, or this can be accessed from that to that particular AWS service. So at that place, we use this IAM instance profile, or nothing but an IAM role. We will see in detail what is this is an IAM role when we discuss about the concept of identity and access management. Okay, and this hostname type and all, you can just ignore for this, because we are not much dealing with right now. And instance auto recovery says that if you want to recover the instance, if you get into this instance auto recovery, your instance, if status check fails, by the hardware failures or an AWS, so it automatically recovers your instance. So something like that, those options. You can have the ability to shut down behavior, terminate or stop. So whenever you shut down, you want to terminate or you want to stop. And you can also change the behavior of an hibernate. So there is a difference between hibernate and stop. So hibernate will preserve your data which is present in your random access memory, but a stop will not. So that's a difference between shutting down or stopping the instance, between to stopping to hibernate. So this is most of the certification question, because I have seen this question when I was giving my certification. So hibernate is something where a data will be preserved, or RAM data, or your what do you say, the cache data will be preserved on this Hibernate. You can select that behavior should be enabled or disabled. And then the termination protection, if you just click on enable, so when someone tries to delete your server or terminate your server, it gives an additional option, or it says that please disable this termination protection, then only you can delete it or terminate it. Okay. And also you can see the stop protection in the similar fashion. If you enable this, it will not stop until you disable this option on the console. We'll see that. And your detailed CloudWatch monitoring. So CloudWatch monitoring is nothing but AWS CloudWatch is a central place where all the metrics, all the logs will be stored on AWS. Okay, so it can be any AWS service. All the AWS services will store their logs on a CloudWatch. So CloudWatch is again a service on AWS where all the application logs, or it can be all the other services logs, will be stored there. So this Elastic GPU, I think it's mostly for Windows servers. Let's check. So it's for Windows users. So most probably I never use this GPU. You can just skip. It's for graphic processing units. So you can select what is the GPU you want to use if you're working some kind of gaming applications or something like that. So, and also credit specifications. So credit specification also, you get this kind of questions based on the unlimited or standard, based on your baseline performances. So you have some kind of understanding on baseline. You should be having some understandings on this baseline performance and all. Let us say your application is running on EC2 instance, okay, and your application reaches 100% of its volume or 100% of its capacity. So then it has some burstable capacity where EC2 allows you to stretch your application more than 100. Okay, so that capacity to how much amount you want to utilize your credits and all. So that's how this speaks on. So this credit specification is altogether a different concept on EC2, where you have your capability of using your credit usage, like how you use your credit card, like you use and then pay. In the similar fashion, it also, you use your credits and then you get billed for that. As we discussed the placement group, you can create a placement group and you can select that placement group here. I haven't created because this is not a free tier, so I don't suggest anyone to create it, but just try to understand that placement group is a place where instances are launched side by side, physically locating at the same place in a form of a cluster, so that you have a very low latency. And capacity reservation also, as we seen, it's option available over here as well. So you can just select if there is any capacity reservation that is present. Okay, so again, tenancy is also something interesting that you can just select, because tenancy, think of like for example a normal scenario where you want to you're going for a different location, like for example if you are going for X place, there you want to share or you want to stay for some amount of days. So then you'll either you share a particular room with someone, or you want to dedicated is nothing but you want to stay in a flat in an apartment, or you want to have a dedicated host is nothing but an individual villa. So in the similar fashion, this tenancy speaks about like how you want to run your hardware. Either you want to have a run on a shared hardware where other applications, other users, other accounts can present, or you want a dedicated run a different dedicated instance. Like it will be a shared hardware, but it won't be like the same pane or the same hardware, what do you say, rack your instance will be running. It will be a dedicated instance. Or if you want a dedicated host, so completely you will be having a different set of hardware with a power supply and all. At that place your instance will be running. So this speaks about that you don't see much implementations of tenancy in your day-to-day activities as a DevOps engineer. So but you need to have an understanding of this tenancy, because if you're going to give any certifications or whether you have it in your interview questions, this is how you need to answer. And the RAM disk ID, this is also more important if you're working on operating system expert or OS developers or something like that. But for now you can just skip, but this gives you the information on which drivers you need to have. So it gives you the list of the drivers that you can select whenever you are installing. So it says like a RAM disk that contains necessary drivers to make choose on the kernel, something like that. Okay, even you can select some kernel IDs. So I'm not getting this details in deeper because this is not related to our training. and some license configuration, some metadata accessible. So this is also pretty much important. I'll get to this because there is a default IP address provided by Amazon with HTTP. I'll just get to that URL now when I switch to the AWS documentation, where you can access the EC2 metadata using a curl. Okay, we'll launch this instance and we'll access that. Okay, and the metadata version and some things. As we see in the user data, you can just provide something. Let us say I want to echo some hi to slash, or first let us say I want to create touch test.txt on temp file, and see I want to put a hi into that slash tmp slash test.txt. Let's give it a try. If we face any error, of we will see whether this has been executed correctly or not. Okay, this says that after instance is launching, hey, please create a test.txt file and write hi into that particular file. Okay, so this give you a detailed summary what your instance speaks about. So let me launch an instance. So my instance has been successfully launched. So this is my first web server. It's still in a pending state. So just wait for a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes. Your instance will be back. Okay, so my instance is back. So I mean, like, my instance is in running state now. So let me quickly view what are the different options that are present for me on this instance. If I click on this instance ID, I'll see the instance ID, public IPv4 address we have already seen, and the private IP address, some instance state, and some DNS, auto assign public IP addresses I have also seen. Auto assign public IP address is there, and I can see multiple options on details, whatever the operating systems, AMI IDs and all. I can see all the options. So whenever we come into the security, you see a security group has been attached to this. Okay, so just think of a scenario on this, because this is a pretty much important topic whenever you come into this. So if you see the inbound rule and outbound rule, so for a security group, you have two options called as an inbound rule and outbound rule, which gives you the ability to connect to an EC2 instance. So let us say, for example, an EC2, let us say this is your EC2 instance. Okay, so you want to connect to your EC2 instance using SSH protocol. You cannot directly connect to this because EC2 objects that connection. Okay, EC2 objects that connection because there is a firewall on this called as security group. Okay, so this security group allows the connections in the form of ports. Okay, so let us say this is an external internet. Okay, so whenever you want to connect, your connection goes to the internet, and from internet it comes over here. If this port 22, so SSH runs on port 22. Okay, so if port 22 is not enabled on EC2 instance, if you request from here via internet for this EC2 instance, your connection will be failed. Okay, so if you enable port 22 on this security group, then your connection to this will be successful. So as SSH communication works on port 22, you need to enable port 22. If you want to do an HTTP request to this EC2 instance, then we need the port 80. If you want to do a HTTPS request, then we need port 443. Okay, so something like that. So based on the application on which port it is running, you need to enable those ports. Okay, so in the security group, you have two options called as inbound rules and outbound rules. So as it says, inbound rules is nothing but the rules of an EC2 instance to which it specifies who can enter into the EC2 instance. Who can enter into the EC2 instance? We have seen all the traffic coming towards the EC2 instance, right? So who can enter? The only persons who are communicating on port 22 can only enter. If someone comes with a protocol of port 23, they cannot enter. So these are all the inbound rules. Inbound rules speaks about the set of rules on EC2 instance using a security group on what port the communication can happen. Okay. So the outbound, it says that the ability for an EC2 instance to communicate back to internet. Okay, so if EC2 instance wants to communicate back to internet and it wants to communicate and download some kind of files from internet, so then it needs to have uh, the outbound connection. So generally by default we have the outbound connection as full. So full outbound connection in the sense on all ports the EC2 instance can connect to the internet because it needs to download some packages, like for example you want to install some yum packages, you want to install some yum update, or you want to install some kind of software or something. So then EC2 should have an internet connection. So the first check on which if EC2 is not having the internet connection is you need to check it. Outbound rules. Okay, so inbound rule speaks about the ability to enter or the a rule that we define who can enter into EC2 instance. So outbound rule is nothing but what EC2 can go into or what EC2 can access the outside internet is what we say about outbound. Okay, so this is about the security group. So let's get into the console and see what else we can see on the console. If you see there is a port 22, so what I'll do is let me connect to the instance using this connect using EC2 instance client, instance connect. So we can also use SSH client, we have already seen, but I generally use this EC2 instance connect because it will open in the browser. As we seen the port 22 communication in earlier class, now we will see how the instance gets connected via a HTTP request or a port 80. So now we will see a demonstration of installing a web server on this Linux instance, and we will see whether we are able to access that or not. Okay, so let me clear the screen. I'll just switch to the root user sudo su. You can go to my earlier video to understand some basic Linux commands if you are new to Linux, but you can always go through internet and search a few more learnings on Linux or the basic understandings on Linux operating systems wherein you can learn more commands on it. So as this is a Amazon Linux based operating system, so you can use yum for installing a Apache package. So you can type yum install httpd. So this will install a package of that. But before that, as we've seen, there is some user data that has been executed. So you can just that will create a file. So on the temp directory, this has not been created. You can go ahead and see why this hasn't been created. Okay, so get into this instance, just see actions, monitor and troubleshoot, get the system log. You can see some more fingerprints of that, but you don't see why this file has not been created. Okay, so as we seen here, we are not able to get our file created using the user data because I did not give any kind of shell script in shebang line when I'm doing this or when I'm creating it. Like for example, getting to the images, instance settings and edit user data. You see I've directly given the touch temp test.txt, but I did not use a shebang line. So shebang line is nothing but, if you can just into get shebang line for shell script, you'll get that. What is a shebang line? is nothing but it gives you this. So this needs to be present so that it says what is the it's a shell script or it's a different script, so it gives you with that shebang line. If I place that, that should have been executed, but I came to know that by getting into the log. You can just get into /var /log cloud init hyphen output.log. If you get into this, if you can just scroll up, you can see there is an unhandled non-multi part, because this says that this is not recognized by the user data of which type of script this is. I should have utilized that, so that's why I said like we'll try this, because this error was anticipated earlier, because I anticipated, yes, I was not given a shebang line, so that my user data did not execute. Okay, so we will see this now. What we'll do is let's install this httpd server on this. Yum install httpd. We'll see the user data again. I'll show you how it executes properly. We'll install this httpd in our next session using the user data, and we'll make that launch template. Okay, so yum install httpd will install a web server. Just click on that. So just press Y. Okay, so it completes the installation. So let me clear the screen. Now according to us, it should be available on port 80, or the HTTP web server listens on port 80. So let me get into the instance, and if I hit on the public IP address, what's my understanding is when I control V on port 80, my application should run and it should be visible. But if you see, it's still running and not able to connect, and after quite a few of minutes it will show as a timeout. This is because I did not enable port 80 on EC2 server from the internet so that I can access the application. Okay, so that's why you need to get over here, get into the security, and just select the security group, open a new tab. Let's get into the inbound rules and do an inbound rule, and just add a port rule of custom TCP with port 80. Okay, or else you can just select direct the HTTP. This also selects the port 80, and I want to select it from anywhere on the internet. So all the CIDR blocks also, that's very much important topic that I'll be discussing in VPC. But there is a subnet mask concept that we need to understand. So all those stuff I'll discuss detail in VPC, but ensure like all zeros is nothing but from anywhere across the internet. I'm trying to hit this instance. I'm not. I want to enable that particular connection, and I'll save rules. If you see here, it's it's completely timed out, but after this connection, if I save, if I see this, it should be able to connect now. So let me hit now, it should say it works. As I have enabled this port 80, but still my application is not accessible because I have installed this application but I haven't started that. So let me start this systemctl start httpd and systemctl enable httpd. Okay, my bad, my command was wrong. Okay, and you can see systemctl is a command for enabling or starting or stopping a service. So I'm just checking. Oh, my bad again, the command is wrong, my typo. So systemctl status httpd. So it says that the httpd server, and it's started, it's loaded, and it's active and running. It can also show the process ID and all those status. Now if you go and hit this, this should work. Okay, so this is how it comes whenever you want to start a web server, or whenever you want to work on this kind of stuff. Okay, it serves on this public IP address. Now you can try hitting it on this public IP address. Whenever I go just paste and provide port 80. They should have. You can try by providing some simple files, or changing this by navigating to, like you can just navigate to var www html folder and just write vi index.html and get some simple, let me get some simple html hello world code. Okay, let me get, because I'm very bad at html, so I just want to get some simple html code. Just copying this, just pasting over here, just press enter and just paste it. Okay, so just as hello world, just escaping that, just writing and quitting. So if you just refresh that, it gets refreshed, so it just went as hello world. Okay, this is how you can just work on your instance and make changes, so that some worker or some user who is trying to access your web server will be able to access that. Okay, so now come back to the instance pane. This is all what you can do inside the server, but there are some other options available on this, what we discussed, like we have already discussed connect. So either you can stop the instance, reboot, or nothing but restart. Stop is nothing but your instance will be moved into stopped state, and you will not be able to connect to it. You can start the instance once you have stopped. You can hibernate, or you can terminate the instance. Terminate stops it, I mean like delete the instance from the farm. You cannot never connect to the instance again. And in the actions, you can just see view the details, will view all the details. And under instance setting, you have a lot of options what we have seen: termination protection, stop protection, auto recovery, which we have already seen, credit specifications, user data, and all this stuff. And networking, the same things what we have seen. A network interface, attached, detached, we'll see on this what is a network interface. And you can also connect to RDS DB, source and destination checks, and manage some IP addresses. And the security groups, if you want to attach a different security group for your EC2 instance, you can attach. You can modify the IAM role so that you can connect to another AWS services. In image and templates, so let us create so on this, if you see there is an option of AMI. So we'll come back to this AMI, but before that, we have already seen what is a security group and what is a placement group, what is a key pair. We will see what is a network interface. So as we see, there should be one network interface connected. If you click on this elastic network interface, this is in use on a subnet and security. And if you can see, it has been associated to this private IP address, which is nothing but 144. And if you just go to this instance and just check what is the private IP address, this is that. So that's what I said, network interface is nothing but will be attached to the EC2 instance, so that it can communicate to the external internet. And key pairs we have already seen, which will be utilized for connecting to your instance. Placement groups, where you create so that instances can be placed at the same point, what do you say, at the same place. So this elastic IP addresses can be attached to the EC2 instances, so that it gets connected, and it will be served instead of this IP address, whatever you see over here. You see an IP address which is already associated with this. Okay, either you can just let's see if there is an option for dissociating your IP addresses. Okay, let me click on manage IP address. In this assign new IP address, either you can assign a new IP address, or you can directly assign from the elastic IP address as we discussed earlier. You can just go to this elastic IPs and allocate elastic IP address, and just select the default one and just click on allocate. So this will create a new IP address. So once that is allocated, you can click on that and associate elastic IP address to an instance, and just you can select this instance and you can associate. So this will be associated to that instance. So if you go ahead and hit this IP address, I hope they should also launch your application without any issue, if I'm not wrong. Okay, so or else I think you need to update the, yeah, you got it. So even this IP address is working, and even this IP address is working. So this is how the elastic IP addresses work. So even though this application terminates, this IP address will also be attached to the new instance, and your application will be back again with the same IP address. So let me disassociate this IP address. This will be chargeable, it's not out of free trial. I'm just releasing this. So first I need to dissociate, then I need to release. Okay, so this is just for understanding. I don't think you need to try anything with the elastic IP addresses. We'll just have some questions in the interviews and all, but generally in a best practice we don't generally use the IP addresses, because most of the stuff we'll be using the load balancers and route 53s. Okay, so this is about elastic and IPs, and we have seen already the security groups in the discussions. And the volumes, so volumes are nothing but you see whatever the volumes that are attached to the instances over here. Like for example, you see there is a volume ID with ending with 9AFT. So this should be the volume that is attached to your instance. So all those details of that volumes will be visible here. You can directly get into this pane and you can see what all these things that are present for this. So if you see the instance, click in this my first web server. Okay, so if you get into the storage, you will see a volume ending with 9AFT, so which is nothing but this. Okay, so the volumes are nothing but the disks which are attached to the instance. You will be able to see on this. And snapshots are nothing but backup of the volumes. You can just go ahead, click on this, select just actions and create snapshot. You can create a snapshot like this. Okay, this will create a backup of your volume. In the similar fashion we have already discussed, you can create an image of your instance by selecting this as a backup. You can just click. Let me select my web server. Where's my web server? Yeah. So let me select my web server. Then on actions, I'll go to the image and templates, and I'll just go and create an image. So this will create my image, like let us say my first AMI. Okay, and just selecting all the volumes, and I'll just do a create image. So this will create an image so that whenever I launch for an EC2 instance, I can select this image for launching. Okay, so this is how the AMIs works, and this is how you can select the AMI when you are selecting or when you are launching a new instance. Either from here also you can select and launch instance from AMI, so that a new instance will be launched. As soon as it launched, it should be serving as an application like this. So this is a task for an assignment. You can just go ahead and try it. You can just create your image and just see whether from the launched image, after launching the instance from AMI, by hitting directly the IP address, you should see hello world. If you're not seeing that, hit me back on the GitHub discussions and all. I'll be able to solve your questions. Okay, so that's all for today's discussions. Majorly I'll be discussing in more detail on load balancing on auto scaling groups, because this requires some more attention. So I'll be explaining this with a more bit of real-time example, and we will see the most one of the architectures of implementations like this. Okay, so we will see this architecture implementation of AWS auto scaling group, a typical EC2 backed load balanced architecture. We'll discuss this architecture and we'll try to execute or implement this architecture on AWS in our next session. Okay, we have covered almost all the topics, but we'll be covering the load balancing and auto scaling groups in detail in our next session, and we'll be seeing up, or we'll be touch basing all these concepts, and we'll be creating this architecture again. Okay, and thanks for joining. So, and this architecture is again a reference from Amazon Doc. So it's a simple implementation we're going to do in our next session, and we're going to make our hands dirty. Thank you. Thanks for joining. Have a great day. Bye.